morning, church. For those of you who might be visiting with us this morning, we are going through something called the story, and that is tracing the entire legacy and lineage from Genesis all the way to Revelation about Jesus, the story from beginning to end of the Bible. And Jeb has done a great job of leading us through all of these different stories. Currently, we're looking at the life of David. And what we've seen so far is that David is just a great, almost perfect example of faithfulness and what it means to be a man after God's own heart. Today, I get to talk about David's failures, and I get to present the story of David and Bathsheba, which is great because I like a challenge. So we're going to jump right into it, and we are going to look at 2 Samuel chapter 11, and we start off strong. Right there in verse 1, David makes his first big mistake. You see, it says, "In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem." This is David's first mistake because what we see here is that David is not where he should be. David does not go to war where he ought to be. What we learn from history is that between sowing the seeds and the time of harvest is springtime, and that's when the men would be called up from the fields in order to go into battle, to lay siege to armies around them, to claim spoils for themselves, and so on and so forth. And David chooses not to take part in this. You have to wonder why. What exactly led him to stay home? What exactly caused him to think, I don't need to do that, not this year. This year, I get to take it easy. This year, I'm going to rest. So what does David do with this time off? Right there in verse 2, David's second mistake. One evening, David got up from his bed, walked around on the roof of the palace, and from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. And the woman was very beautiful. See, the second mistake is that David chooses to look at what he should not be looking at. And not only to look at Bathsheba, but to watch her, to keep his eyes on her. In Hebrew, they do a lot of play on words. It's very interesting how they combine words sometimes and ideas. And one of the ways that they describe temptation is they call it an eye hook. And that word for hook is the same hook that you use for fish when you go fishing. So the idea is when you scan the horizon and something catches your eye, it's hooked to that thing. And it's almost like you can't look away. You keep coming back to it. You keep returning to this thing, this object of your temptation, this object of your desire. And David was hooked to this woman who we find out in verse 3 is named Bathsheba. David's third mistake. David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." So then David sent messengers to go and get her. This is the third mistake, possibly the worst he's made so far. David does what he should not do. It's very interesting because we see in this the pattern of sin, the pattern of temptation. The Apostle John very clearly lays this out for us in another passage. In 1 John chapter 2, verse 16, he says, "Everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world." See, what John is doing in this chapter, in this verse, he's laying out the secrets that Satan uses to ensnare us. Every sin, from the very beginning, every sin follows this pattern. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. David enjoyed leisure while his men went out to war. He took comfort in staying home and not going to the battle lines like he ought to. He enjoyed his pride of life. David went looking for something and let his eyes rest on, get hooked on Bathsheba. He enjoyed the lust of the eyes. David called for her and had her brought to him. He did what he should not have done. And so he engaged in the lust of the flesh. This pattern is everywhere. This pattern is set out in every temptation you will ever face. This pattern is set out in every temptation that we see in Scripture, all the way back to the very beginning. In Genesis chapter 3 and verse 6, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and she ate it. Then she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. The fruit was good for food, good for the flesh. It was pleasing to the eye. It was desirable for gaining wisdom, not just wisdom, but the ability, like God, to choose for yourself right and wrong. If that's not pride of life, I don't know what is. But what happens next in the story? We remember that Adam and Eve, they take the fruit. All of a sudden, they discover their nakedness, their shame. And what do? They run. They hide. They attempt to cover themselves, to conceal themselves, to make secret the mistake that they've made. David is no different. When David gets the news that Bathsheba has become pregnant, he does everything within his power to conceal the fact that he did this, to hide the truth. He brings Uriah back from the front lines, and multiple times he attempts to get Uriah drunk. He attempts to get Uriah to go home, to spend the night with his wife so that he can play it off as if it's Uriah's child. And every single time, Uriah refuses. It's very interesting because Uriah is a man of good character and follows the same kind of thinking that David follows when he was under Saul and living in his household. Do you remember that whenever Saul sought to kill David, whenever Saul sought the worst for David, David only sought the best for him? Had David had the choice, he would have remained with Saul his entire life. And Uriah says, how can I go home? How can I take pleasure? How can I take leisure at this time away from the battlefield when my brothers, my friends are fighting and dying? I will not do this. Instead, my lord the king, I will go down to your servants' quarters and I will sleep there and wait on your instruction. It's very interesting because Uriah has the heart of David. But David needs to conceal his sin. He needs to hide it. He needs to excuse it. He needs to justify it. And so David uses any means possible. Just like when Adam and Eve saw the fruit, that it was good for the flesh, that it was pleasing to the eye, that it was desirable for wisdom, David stayed home. He went where he should not have gone. David looked at what he should not have seen. David took what he should not have taken. And just like Adam and Eve, he falls into the trap of trying to conceal his sin and keep it hidden. I want to take a moment here and kind of go off on a sidetrack a bit, because we can see all throughout history, throughout the Bible, people falling into this pattern over and over and over again, and trying to excuse and justify their actions. It reminds me of when I was in college and I took a course on philosophy and ethics. It's Philosophy and Ethics 101, basic introduction to the topic. One of the things that we talked a long time about was this idea of moral relativity. If you don't know what that is or what that means, it's the idea that morality is relative to each culture, relative to each place, relative to each group. In other words, whatever the group decides is good or bad, that's what it is. It's morality under groupthink. It's very interesting because this really gets back to the very beginning of allowing us, of us wanting to decide for ourselves between right and wrong. And this idea is manifest fully in the idea of moral relativity. So all things can be justified depending on what others say. Now, immediately we have some reservations about that, right? So we would think, okay, what about, for example, murder, right? Murder is always wrong. Has to be. And the moral relativist would say, someone who argues for this point of view, they would say, I'm glad you brought that up. I was waiting for you to say that. As a matter of fact, consider this. And they will point to groups around the world where they can justify it, and they do. For example, I remember hearing about or reading about a tribe in the Amazon. They were called the Yanomami tribe. This tribe had spent millennia in brutal feuds and wars with the surrounding tribes. And it had become so ingrained in them to fight, to kill, to die, that they began to ascribe murdering those of the other tribes with goodness. The more you kill, the more you do it in secret, the better off you are. So the moral relativists will point to this and tell you, you see, even this can be justified. However, there's a reason that moral relativity is taught in Philosophy 101, right? Because my professor told us, well, there is one thing, at least one thing, that all people everywhere, all groups, can agree on being morally wrong under any circumstance. And that is lying. It makes sense if you think about it. What group of people can come together? What tribe could form? What society can form if we are accepting of, inviting of, permissible of lying? We can't work together. We have no common ground. We have nothing to base our well-being on if I cannot trust what you say and vice versa. If truth is not the foundation of our very being, we have nothing. Trust and truth is fundamental to the world itself. In fact, again, in the very beginning, whenever God speaks, his words manifest into creation. He says, let there be light, and there is. He says, let the oceans find their boundaries. Let the dry land come forth. And it does. When he speaks, creation jumps at his word. I think that sometimes when we look back on the story of Adam and Eve, we can almost give them a bad rap. We think that it was so obvious right? That this was a lie, that this was a trap, that this was a mistake. How could they do that? But remember, Adam and Eve lived in a world of absolute truth. Whatever was spoken, whatever was said, was true at all times. They had never encountered deception. They'd never heard a lie. And so when this gets presented to them, you will surely not die. When this gets presented to them that you can be like God, deciding right from wrong, they have no concept of what a lie is. And so now they're faced with two statements. You shall not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for if you do, you will surely die. And you will not surely die. He told you that because he knows that you can decide right and wrong for yourself. You could almost think of this like, well, maybe there was an update, right? Maybe it got amended. Maybe that's what happened. I don't know. I can't pretend to understand why they made the choice that they made, but they made the wrong one. And so Adam and Eve fell into a cycle that began the fall of all mankind. They hide to cover themselves. Later in Genesis, a man named Laban begins taking slaves for himself. He begins taking multiple wives. Cain murders his brother. Moses hides the body of the Egyptian that he murders. Jacob flees to his relative's house to avoid the consequence of his actions. Abraham lies to protect himself. There's a common theme of sin and secrecy. Sin thrives in secrecy. I remember when I was a kid, I went to go see Harry Potter. Have you guys seen Harry Potter? I'm sure you have. In those books and in the movies, there's something in it called the Devil's Snare. It's very interesting. When you come in contact with the Devil's Snare, it immediately coils around you. It's like a root. It immediately coils around you, it constricts you, it binds you, and it begins to choke you. It looks like this. And it's funny because the girl in this picture, she's the smart one of the group, and so she begins telling her friends, look, the more you fight against this thing, the more you kick and scream, the more that you punch and try to escape through brute force, the more it's going to choke you, the more it's going to constrict you, the faster it's going to kill you. To which her friend replies, kill us faster, great, now I can relax, right? But she tells him, you have to relax, you have to release, you have to let go. If you release, it will release you. I think this is just like the perfect example of sin. The more you struggle, the more that you kick and fight, the more it constricts around you, the more it chokes you, the more it binds you. The only way to be free of it is to release it. Through confession, through repentance, through trust in others, through honesty. Honesty is the antidote of all sin. So, coming back to David, he receives a dose of honesty. He thinks, I have done it. I've concealed my sin. I have successfully gotten rid of Uriah. I've waited the appropriate amount of time. I've taken Bathsheba into my house. She's now pregnant. She's going to have our child. No one will know. This will be a bit of unfortunate history that no one needs to know about. Except, along comes the prophet Nathan. Nathan tells this parable about the sheep and the shepherd, and he gets David worked up in a fury. And he reveals to him, you are the man. You are the one who has done this thing. You are the one who has caused this sin. David, to his credit, immediately repents on the spot. He confesses what he's done. He owns up to it. He gets put back on the right course. And this is important because David, at this point, was at a crucial junction in his reign as a king. I think that had he continued on in his deception, had he continued on to let his sin bind him in secret, he would have ended up no different than Saul. But unlike Saul, David is a man after God's own heart, willing to accept what he has done wrong, willing to own it, willing to move past it. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that there's no consequences. The consequences of his sin do not magically disappear. Nathan tells David, "Now therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all of Israel." The truth is, David loses a lot more than he ever would have gained from his secrecy. After Nathan reveals the truth to David and he repents, he's told that his son, the one that was conceived in secret, will die. Nathan immediately goes into prayer, into solitude, into fasting. He stays this way for a long time. Ultimately, though, the child does not survive. The tragedy of the story is that that's only the first son that he loses as a consequence of his sin with Bathsheba. You see, there's another story that follows in chapter 13 of 2 Samuel. I won't repeat what happened. You ought to read it, but it is very graphic. One of David's sons does something horrific to a family member. And David's response is to be angry and do nothing. He says nothing. He does not act on it. He chooses to remain silent. And the injustice of this, the fury that is in Absalom's heart, his other son, is so much so that it begins to fester. It's like an open wound that won't stop bleeding. And after 2 years of nurturing this hatred, Absalom murders his brother. Shortly after that, he begins a revolution to overthrow his father, the king. Absalom, in turn, gets murdered. And we'll see this later, but another son of David is murdered by Solomon. And all of it is because of David's inaction, of David's fear to speak out against the very sin that he committed. He feels that he is a hypocrite and therefore unable to speak truth into his son's life, to do what needs to be done. And because of that, the sword never departs his house, and it crumbles from the inside. If you hear nothing else today, if you're sleeping, wake up, look at this. You can go right back to sleep after. Do not let your sin grow in secret. Do not let your sin grow in secret. Don't do it. Because it will only grow and it will only tighten around your neck. Hebrews 4:13 says, "Nothing in all of creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give an account." Everything that is done is already known by God. Even the intentions of your heart. It's all there. It's all laid bare before him. Even if we tell ourselves, I've gotten away with it, we haven't. We haven't. We've concealed it. We keep it hidden. But it only festers. It only grows. It only chokes us more. In Luke 12, verses 2 through 5, Jesus says this: there is nothing at all that is concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What you have said in the dark will be heard in the light. What you have whispered in the ear of the inner rooms will be proclaimed from the very roofs. I tell you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who can kill the body, and after that do no more. I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him who, after your body has been killed, still has authority to throw you into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. This is not a fire and brimstone sermon. I hope that you don't hear that. Instead, it's a warning. A call that we should not allow ourselves to keep hidden, to keep secret, to hide our sin, and to let it grow. John lays it out for us. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Don't go where you know you should not go. Don't look at what you know you should not look at. Don't do what you know you should not do. There's a lot to be learned from David and his life, the many stories that had been recorded about him. But I think maybe this might be one of the most important. If you do not reveal what is really going on in your life to your brothers and sisters, it will eat you from the inside out. It will destroy you. It will hollow out your soul. And the sad part is, there would be no one to blame but ourselves. It's kind of a somber note, but it's a somber topic. My prayer is that if anyone here today is struggling with something that they're keeping hidden, if you're struggling with a sin that you feel is choking you out, is just constricting and binding, and you cannot get away, come forward. Tell us about that. Go to room 9. Talk with the prayer team about it. Let someone know so that we can help and speak truth into your life. If you are one of the lucky few who is not dealing with some secret, some sin that you're trying to cover or conceal, the Lord bless you in that. But also remember the snares that the devil has laid out for you. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. I'll say it again. Don't go where you should not go. Don't look at what you should not look at. Don't do what you know you should not do. Now, as we stand and sing, I just pray that if anyone would like to come forward for prayers, for any kind of confession, or if you feel the need to put on the Lord in baptism today, please come forward and do that as we stand and sing.